Hello, Star Trek fans. Welcome to ReBinge It. This is the ReBinge Star Trek Voyager podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we are rebinging Star Trek Voyager from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 1, Episode 15, Jetrel. This episode aired May 15th, 1995. Before we get into this one, do you have anything to say about last week's episode, which was Faces?
Yes, fantastic makeup. Very gross.
Oh, right, the beef jerky people.
I think your comment, shouldn't they be more drippy? A little bit juicier?
I'm glad they're not drippier.
Great makeup and effects.
Yeah, and good costumes, too. Those creepy aliens, they have pretty good costumes.
Yeah. A really well put together Star Trek episode.
Indeed. All right, well then let's get started on this one. I have the notes.
Yes, you do. This seems like a very relevant episode, seeing as Oppenheimer is just started streaming, or I've just become aware of it started streaming. It was a couple of weeks ago.
It's appeared on Peacock, yes. I do have a mention of Oppenheimer later. So yeah, it does seem a little bit on point.
Right.
So off we go. In the cold open, we're in Tom's smoky French holodeck program.
Yep.
Why would it be smoky? Is this not in the future? Are we really supposed to think that people are still smoking in this evolved society?
Well, maybe there's a guy at the bar selling death sticks.
Oh, Star Wars. Thank you very much. Well, Neelix and Tuvok are learning how to play pool, and it turns out neither are very good at it. Although Tuvok claims that the real problem is the ship's stabilizers are probably just not working properly, and that's impacting his game.
That is very similar to playing pool with a friend who wasn't doing very well, and it was everything else was the problem.
Yeah, seems right. Janeway calls Neelix to the bridge, where we learn that an approaching vessel is asking to speak to Neelix. Neelix recognizes the shuttle as Hakonian, the people who conquered his homeworld 15 years ago.
Weren't they the bad guys from Dune?
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I was like, I've heard this before.
Yeah, I think it's the way they say it later. It sounds like Harkonnen.
Well, maybe there was a connection. We open a channel and meet a rather gray-looking alien with long gray hair who says he needs to speak with Neelix in private. He says Neelix's life may depend on it.
Don't trust him. This is Dr. Moira in disguise. And we know how bad a parent he was to Odo.
Yeah, this character is played by an actor named James Sloyan, and we've seen him a number of times before. He played a Romulan on TNG, and like James said, he played Dr. Moira, who's Odo's dad on Deep Space Nine in multiple episodes.
And is a terrible parent.
Yeah, he was not a good parent. But to be fair, he also wasn't Odo's real parent.
Well, there is that.
Yeah.
Mind you, if you compare him to Odo's actual parents, the founders, they were truly appalling.
Oh yeah, this guy's more negligent than he is horrifying. Well, anyway, back to this story. When Neelix asks who the dude is, he says his name is Dr. Marber Jetrel. This makes Neelix flip out, and he runs off the bridge looking like he might vomit in the hallway.
Yeah, when he leaves the bridge, I think he's in the turbo lift, and he's like shaking.
Yeah. And then we cue the theme song.
Another, to the point, rapid opening and into the episode.
Yes. Well, now Neelix is telling Janeway that this Dr. Jetrel is a mass murderer. When he was young, his family lived on a moon called Rhinax. It was a beautiful place until the Metreon Cascade, which was a weapon of mass destruction.
Yep.
Neelix says Jetrel is the scientist who conceived of the weapon, and he led the team that built it, and in the blink of an eye, Rhinax was enveloped in a deadly cloud, leaving the moon in an endless frigid night. Over 300,000 people were killed, but Neelix survived because he was on Talax with the defense forces at the time. He says they were preparing for an invasion that never came. After the attack on Rhinax, the Talaxians surrendered unconditionally to the Hakonian order.
Yep.
But Neelix's family was completely wiped out.
Yeah, Neelix is being a little ranty, but I suppose it is for a very good reason.
Yes, his parents and his siblings were all killed.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem is Neelix has been written as such a goofy character. And then when you try and bring in a little bit more seriousness, it doesn't work quite as well. And I will defend Ethan Phillips here. He's good. It's just sort of the character of Neelix is annoying.
Yeah. I'm not sure they knew how funny the Doctor was going to be. Like, they didn't need another comic relief character.
Right.
But if you're going to make the comic relief character all of a sudden have something serious, then it's like a little jarring to go from the completely goofy to the completely deadly serious.
Right.
Yeah.
And I will also say, I think Neelix, later on in the series, where he has some more serious stories, it's actually helped by they built Neelix up a little bit more. So I think future stories, it works better. But you're right about the Doctor. Part of what makes the Doctor extraordinarily funny is he plays the character completely straight.
Yes. Yeah, I was just discussing this with one of our listeners in email, and they were talking about that they've always sort of struggled with the Doctor and why is he so different from Data? Why does he have so much humor and a personality? And I think it's maybe just because the guy, Zimmerman, who created him, he just made him completely in his own image.
Right. Yes. And I think going into some headcanon here, part of it is that the Doctor, the program for the Doctor, which is based on Zimmerman, is also a learning program. So actually can become more than Zimmerman.
Yeah.
I mean, Zimmerman, we see, has a lot of flaws and a lot of issues. And is just kind of a bit of a jerk. But the Doctor has the ability to actually become better as a person, as an individual.
But Data also had the ability to learn.
Yeah.
So why didn't he evolve as a person? I think they were very focused with him on him being a robot.
Yeah.
We haven't even seen the Doctor yet, and we're talking about we're spending all our time talking about the Doctor.
We could do an extra 20 minutes of talking just about Data and our thoughts on the character.
Yeah, we probably could. Well, Janeway and Tuvok now greet Dr. Jetrel, who is enamored with Voyager's transporter technology.
Yep.
It seems Neelix has declined meeting Jetrel, which doesn't surprise him.
Yeah.
Janeway says she has permission to speak on Neelix's behalf, so Jetrel tells her it's imperative Neelix undergo a full medical exam immediately. He says their war records show that he was part of the team that returned to Rhinax after the Cascade in search of survivors, and he was exposed to high concentrations of Metreon isotopes. In recent years, several of those rescuers have developed a degenerative disease called metremia. The disease is fatal if left untreated, and it can lay dormant for years. I guess it was fatal even if you did treat it, but you could maybe extend his life a bit.
He wasn't telling quite the full story, I think.
Yeah, he really wasn't. Well, Jetrel has special equipment that can identify the disorder. He's been examining people with this disease for years and hopes his research will lead to a cure.
Janeway is being awfully pleasant to meeting effectively a mass murderer.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Like, because they go right from Neelix saying this guy built the nuclear bomb, right?
Yeah.
Right to Tuvok and Janeway going, oh, well, hello, welcome to the ship. Can we show you to your quarters?
We have tea and sandwiches on the observation deck.
Yeah, I thought it was a little bit awkward. Down in Neelix's kitchen, he's licking his fingers while cooking for other people, which is just gross. And Kes asks him why he's never talked about the war, and Neelix says it's just too hard to discuss what he saw, and he just avoids the conversation even now.
Neelix's reaction to this is quite realistic. A lot of veterans don't want to share their war experiences.
Except for the fact that Neelix wasn't really in the war, so he's lying.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll get there.
Yeah.
By the way, Kes looks like an elf in the scene with her little blue and gray outfit and tights and her pointy ears.
Oh,
I imagine that's what they were going for, but it just really stood out here.
She's a South Pole elf.
Thank you, buddy. In comes Janeway to tell Neelix what she's learned. Neelix declines to be screened by this evil person. He doesn't believe the guy's motives, and frankly, neither did I when I was watching this episode. Janeway suggests that maybe he's trying to undo some of the damage that he caused. For some reason, they don't tell Neelix that it could help other Talaxians, but even without that info, they do eventually talk him into it.
Yeah.
Now Janeway, Jetrel, and Neelix are chatting in a dark conference room. It's always so dark on Voyager in the conference rooms.
Limited power budget. They have to keep the lights low.
I would respect that if that was the reason.
You know, I know some people have criticized Voyager because of its lighting, but one of the things I loved about Voyager, well, I still do, is how the lighting is so different from TNG and Deep Space Nine, like on the Defiant.
Yeah.
They give a lot more mood to these scenes by using the lighting. It gives more of a sense of intimacy in these scenes.
One of the things I've always really liked about Discovery is how sort of dark and atmospheric all of the scenes are. It makes it more movie-like.
Discovery, when Michael's in the Mirror Universe, fantastically well lit.
Yeah. I always liked it. They stopped doing it later, but in the beginning when they would go, black alert, right? The computer, that sort of sing-songy voice would go, black alert, and then it would go all dark. I always liked that.
Yeah.
Jetrel is talking about how it can take years for symptoms to manifest, and Neelix asks him if he feels guilty for what he did. Like, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
He says he doesn't regret it. He did what had to be done.
Oh.
And Neelix says, oh, really? So it was necessary to vaporize more than 250,000 people and leave thousands of others to be eaten away by Metreon poisoning.
Oh, this is very much Manhattan Project.
Jetrel says they never thought there'd be radiation poisoning. So basically, everyone was supposed to have died. There weren't supposed to be any survivors to die horribly later. And Janeway at this point is like, uh-oh, this isn't going well.
Yeah, not going as planned.
Jetrel said, God, that's hard to say. Jetrel. He needs an easier name to say. Like Dr. Moira, that was easier.
Yeah.
Jetrel says he's simply a scientist, and it was the government and military leaders who decided to use it. That is quite a justification.
It works.
This is where I put in my notes. I'm sure this is exactly what the Oppenheimer movie is like.
Yeah.
Because I also have not watched it. Jetrel says he lives with his conscience, asking Neelix how many people he killed in the war. Janeway again interrupts, but it really doesn't matter because Neelix says he'd rather die than help Jetrel.
Yeah.
And Jetrel finally says he wants to help Neelix, but maybe more importantly, he wants to help other Talaxians.
Yeah.
And he asks Neelix to see that this is more important than just punishing him.
That was a good way of approaching it.
Yeah, we should have just started there and just not even talked about it afterwards. Let's just say that's what we're doing and just focus on it. I always get really frustrated when you feel like you've come to a compromise or an agreement on something and you start to move ahead and then one person keeps bringing up all the negative reasons for the compromise. And it's just like, this is not helping. Okay, we've agreed to move on. Let's just move on.
We have both worked with people whose first reaction to everything is, that won't work because...
I think we talked about that once on this podcast. Yeah, there was one person who we just simply called her, that won't work because...
Yeah.
Because she said it so often. In sickbay now, Jetrel is running tests on some big pieces of equipment while the holographic doctor looks on. And this is where I would be so suspicious. Like, you're telling me our computerized program can't understand what you're doing. It can't comprehend whatever these pieces of equipment are supposed to be doing.
I have some notes on this.
Okay.
So the doctor with this vast amount of knowledge doesn't know how to scan Neelix. Now, I'm going to justify that by saying, I guess he has a limited knowledge of Neelix's physiology, even after the phage episode. So he may not know exactly what he's looking for. This may be something that's very unique to Talaxians, and he doesn't know when things are going wrong.
Well, I totally agree with that, but what I don't agree with is that he couldn't learn it, or they couldn't just share the data and put it into the Voyager computer.
Right.
Because he was acting like it will only work with my equipment.
Okay, I have some headcanon for that.
Yeah.
Because the doctor would actually have to read the books on the subject.
One at a time, one line at a time. Yeah.
It is a question of why you couldn't just upload everything to the doctor and him have the whole breadth of experience. But you could make the argument of there's no time to waste.
I guess. Well, while Jetrel is scanning him, Neelix starts telling Kes some stories about rodents on Rhinax that he built a trap for. One got caught in his trap, but he wasn't dead. It was screaming in pain. And in that state, it didn't look like an evil creature, but a poor, innocent animal. He says he became so fascinated with his invention, he never considered how that poor creature would suffer.
Ooh.
And everyone in the room, except maybe Kes, understands the point that Neelix is trying to make.
Yeah.
It's not exactly veiled.
Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should necessarily do it.
Well, bad news. Jetrel says Neelix has incipient metremia. Dramatic music plays, and we get real close-ups on everybody. Later, Neelix is lying in bed staring at the ceiling when Kes comes in. He immediately goes into showman mode, telling stories of battle and not appearing upset about the diagnosis. Kes says they need to face his illness together, and Neelix says when they first met, he didn't know her species lived only 8 or 9 years. That was the first time we've heard 8 as a possibility.
Yeah, it keeps on getting worse and worse for her.
I know. Anyway, he says now he'll die first so he doesn't have to worry about living without her. It's like, yikes, Neelix.
That's putting a positive spin on it.
Sure. She says we have to cherish whatever time we have together.
That's good advice generally, I think.
Yes. Jetrel comes to see Janeway to again say how amazing the transporter is. He says with a few modifications, the transporter could be used to retrieve a sample of Metreon cloud surrounding Rhinax.
Very suspicious. He's so interested in the transporters.
Yes. He's always believed he could isolate the free isotope that causes metremia and that it could be used to synthesize an antibody. Janeway says then theoretically a victim's own immune system could fight the disease. She goes into scientist mode.
Yep.
If the isotope is stable enough to be transported, we could construct a containment field to prevent contamination of the ship, and the holodoc could assist in synthesizing this antibody.
And we all know how well those containment fields have worked in the past.
I know when we were watching it, that was the first thing I said. It's like, did we not learn anything from the Beowulf episode?
Yeah, Janeway will order only red shirts and extras to engineering when we try this. Oh, and guest stars.
Yeah. Well, the doctor agrees with Janeway, saying this is exactly what he was thinking. So Janeway calls Chakotay and says, we're going to the Talaxian system. Even though it's a significant detour, she says it could save Neelix's life.
She is such a definition of a Federation captain. She's prepared to go out of her way for the needs of the one.
For one person.
Yeah.
And she's so focused on it.
Right.
Yeah. Like, now I know this bad thing about Neelix. I'm going to do everything in my power to fix it.
Yeah. It's such a positive Star Trek model.
Yeah. It's very Star Trek. As Jetrel is leaving her office, he is struck with some kind of attack, grabbing the wall in pain.
Yeah.
But he explains it away, saying he's just working too hard, and he's a little overly excited. She suggests the holographic doctor check him out, but he says he's too busy, and he leaves.
Yeah. Red flag.
More suspicions.
Anybody who watches Star Trek regularly will be going, ooh.
Or television. You know something's coming. Although, certainly didn't expect what did come, but yes. In sickbay, the doctor has nothing to do for Neelix or Jetrel, so he says, computer, override command 1, EMH, alpha, and end program. And he disappears. And Jetrel's like, ooh, cool.
He seemed surprised the holograph could turn itself off.
Yes.
That doesn't seem terribly radical to me.
Well, it is kind of weird. Jetrel continues to examine Neelix while Neelix continues to insult him.
Yeah.
He says if he'd been in charge of the weapon, he wouldn't have targeted innocent civilians. And Jetrel says the strategists didn't think a demonstration would be enough. They wanted to show the power of the cascade in all of its horror. Neelix asks, why didn't you stop them? But Jetrel says it wouldn't have made any difference. If I hadn't have discovered it, someone else would have.
Yeah.
It was a scientific inevitability. Man can't stop science.
Interesting. This actually is a parallel to the Manhattan Project because from my research, 70 plus scientists involved with it from the project petitioned Truman in July not to use the weapon against Japan. And there were discussions, which I don't think went very far, into using it in a demonstration-only mode. So Jetrel's comment might be valid, that it wouldn't have made any difference, but even if he'd spoken out, at least maybe you'd have the moral high ground.
Well, Jetrel basically says knowing how the universe works is valuable to everyone, but you have to be willing to live with the consequences. Of course, the trouble is the people who had to live with the consequences had nothing to do with it.
Often the case.
Yeah. Jetrel says Neelix wasn't the only one who lost family. When he returned home, his wife couldn't even look at him. She thought he'd become a monster, and eventually she took their children and disappeared.
And he'd not seen them since.
I mean, it's not exactly the same as when they all die horribly.
No, that is a little different because the children are alive. He just hasn't seen them since that happened. Perhaps she's more worried that he could have Metreon radiation poisoning and she does not want to be irradiated.
Neelix has little sympathy for this story, telling him about what he saw in Rhinax after the cascade.
Yeah.
There was nothing there but smoldering ruins and the stench of burned flesh. The people who were left alive were so burned and mangled, they looked like monsters. Jetrel turns away as Neelix talks about a child they found named Palaxia. She was alive when they found her, but over time she withered away and died. This makes Jetrel cry.
Yeah.
He says there's no way he can ever apologize, and that's why he hasn't tried. And Neelix says maybe your wife was right, and you have become a monster. And Jetrel says he thought so too the day they tested the weapon. Neelix says he hopes he has to live with that for a very long time, but Jetrel says Neelix won't get his wish because he has advanced metremia, and he'll be dead in a matter of days.
Oh, yes. So his own invention has come back to haunt him.
Yep.
This episode really is heavily influenced by nuclear weapons and the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, clearly. And this is kind of our second episode about nuclear energy.
Yeah.
Now we're back in the holodeck and Neelix is playing pool with Jetrel, but it's darker and spookier, like in a dream. Jetrel calls him a coward and Neelix is getting annoyed. Then Janeway appears and says, Neelix, where did you go? Why did you leave us? Neelix says, I did what I thought was right. And then Kes appears and she's all burned up, looking a little bit like Darth Maul.
Wow, those are incredible makeup effects, yet again.
Yes.
I mean, it is horrific. The way she literally looks burned.
Yes. And Kes is asking, where did you go? Why didn't you help us? And then he gets into a fight with Jetrel, but Jetrel turns into Neelix, so he's like fighting with himself.
Yeah.
And then Janeway calls, waking him up from his nightmare. They're approaching Rhinax.
Neelix is very sweaty when he wakes up.
Yeah, he's quite upset. And this again is another example of where, we're approaching Rhinax and I have to wake you up. It's so ridiculous because they would have known exactly what time they were going to get there.
Set an alarm, Neelix.
Anyway, Neelix comes to the bridge as they show Rhinax on the view screen, and it's just covered in a gray cloud.
Yeah, the cascade totally destroyed the planet. I wonder if that was a reference to a nuclear winter. The idea that if you used enough nuclear weapons, you would basically end up ruining the atmosphere for potentially decades.
Yeah, I assume so. Neelix says the night of the cascade, a bright, blinding light filled the sky, stopping everything like a moment out of time. B'Elanna calls at that moment to say they're ready to begin. And Neelix says looking at Rhinax brings back too many bad memories and he needs to leave the bridge.
Ugh.
And he does.
Oh, that's pretty rough.
Down in engineering, Jetrel is complaining about the size of the container B'Elanna is using, but she says, don't worry, we do this all the time.
Sometimes successfully.
Yes, sometimes it works. But again, it's suspicious that he's concerned about the size of the container.
Red shirts and extras only in engineering.
Well, they beam a bit of the cloud into the container and everything looks okay as Jetrel stares into the purple cloud. Kes now finds Neelix hiding in the dark kitchen. Apparently, he took his comm badge off because he wanted to be alone.
Oh.
And now we learn that Neelix wasn't fighting with the Defense Forces the day of the attack. He was actually hiding from them.
Stolen valor.
He says he was not a hero and he never reported for duty. He thought the war was unjust and Talax was fighting for reasons that weren't worth killing for. Or at least that's what he told himself, because the real reason he didn't report was that he was a coward. He's been living with this shame for all these years because his entire family was killed while he hid. And Kes asks if he's really angry at Jetrel or if he's angry at himself.
Yeah.
Neelix says she might be right, but he still hates Jetrel.
Well, Jetrel just still destroyed his homeworld.
He did. Kes says he needs to stop hating himself before he can stop hating Jetrel.
Now, was he really a coward? If he saw the war as unjustified, did he come to this conclusion after the events of the Cascade?
Mm-hmm.
He was genuinely opposed to the war, and then this happened, and he felt like a coward for not getting involved.
Well, they try to make that point a little bit in this scene because Kes is saying to him, you were putting your own life at risk anyway, because if they had caught you for being a defector, you would have paid with your life. So, she was also sort of trying to make the point of that was a brave decision. But I think he has just managed to convince himself that wasn't the real reason.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think after what happened, he started to maybe regret it. And over time, that guilt has built up. And he's never talked about it.
Yeah.
So he's just spent all this time being ashamed of it. And he turned it in his mind into cowardice. Now, whether or not it was, who knows?
Right.
But I thought they did a good job of sort of painting both sides as possibilities for him.
Right. I took it as he was justified. And because of the events, he came round to saying, no, I was just a coward. So he sort of talked himself into it.
Well, but was he protesting? Was he trying to stop the war? Was he doing anything about it? Or was he just hiding so he didn't have to go to war? Who knows?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. With that one, we never answered. But it certainly does point to some issues in Talaxian society if you're refusing military service and the answer was the penalty is death.
Yeah.
It doesn't point to maybe a very...
enlightened?
Yeah. The society has problems.
Yeah.
And I guess the final thing is Neelix. I guess Neelix made up his war stories because of the guilt he feels about not doing anything when they were blowing up their planets.
Yes. Yeah. He didn't want to explain it at any rate because he'd convinced himself that he was a coward. Yep.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. And it's sort of a good example of a mental health issue that never really know. It's like another thing we don't really know how to deal with in the 90s. We don't have any counselors on the ship or anything to do anything about it.
Well, even working in the recovery efforts, you could end up with PTSD from the things he saw and witnessed.
Yeah, absolutely. I did wonder, how did he show up in the records of helping if he had defected? Maybe he joined then once that happened.
Well, they said they surrendered the day after. So maybe at that point, they were more interested in getting help to the planet than enforcing the strict rules of wartime.
Right.
They were in sort of panic mode.
Now we go to sickbay where Jetrel is using his fancy equipment and the doctor asks if he's ready to begin synthesis. And then Jetrel just casually issues the EMH shutdown command. And you're like, uh-oh, what just happened?
What?
Apparently, anyone, even people not in the crew, can just issue orders to the computer.
I think they need some safety protocols here of stopping anyone from turning it off. I bet they still have open Ethernet ports everywhere.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, you just needed a subspace shunt and you could take over anything.
Well, the doctor protests but disappears as Jetrel pushes some buttons and the sample cloud in the container turns into a pile of something that looks organic, but it's sort of a twisted mess.
It's a container of goop.
Meanwhile, Neelix enters, startling Jetrel. Jetrel tries to get him to leave, but it's too late, and Neelix sees the weird thing inside the container and starts questioning Jetrel about what this weird experiment really is.
Why do you have a container of goo?
And Jetrel says, you don't understand. I can help them. Neelix says he's going to tell the captain, but Jetrel grabs him and uses a hypospray to knock him out.
Another good Star Trek tradition.
Yep. On the bridge now, Janeway calls sickbay to check in on Jetrel's progress, but nobody answers, which makes her roll her eyes. When Janeway activates the EMH, the doctor says Jetrel deactivated him. I thought the doctor had the ability to reactivate himself.
Right.
Well, then Tuvok asks the computer where Jetrel is, and he's in transporter room 1.
Because we just let aliens wander the ship without any kind of guard or supervision. Put someone at the door.
Well, you don't even need a guard. All you need is to have appropriate access to get into the door.
Oh, that's a good point. I'm not going to let you in.
Exactly. Who are you? Yeah. I don't know who you are.
You could have an argument with the door.
So you can't get into the transporter. You know, this would stop a lot of crazy crap that goes on in Star Trek.
That's
if
true.
They would only allow people into the transporter room if they were in the crew.
Even if they put one of those little combination locks with numbers on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4. Oh no, you've guessed the Starfleet access code.
Mm-hmm. Janeway and Tuvok and security run to the transporter room where they find Jetrel pressing buttons on the console. He says, you must let me continue my work. Lives depend on it. And in this very Janeway tone, she says, we've heard that from you before. You're beginning to lose credibility. I love the way she said that.
Yes. I love the way she can just switch mood. And she's straight into the very serious Janeway here.
Yeah, that super serious tone. Yeah. Well, it turns out that Jetrel's secret plan is to somehow use the transporter to reform the victims of Rhinax out of the cloud.
Yes.
He shows the captain a datapad and says he thinks he can undo the vaporization. And the captain is like, this seems impossible. And we get a lot of technobabble trying to explain it, which I am not going to repeat.
Yep.
Well, it seems that Jetrel, using medical records, has been able to identify the genetic coding of a single person to use as a test case. There are so many things wrong with his plan, even Tuvok says it's crazy.
He has to be the downer and point out that it's virtually impossible. Throw the spanner into the works.
Yeah, he'll be talking about that in his podcast later. And it'll also be something like, why did we let this guy into the transporter room? This is inappropriate.
He formed an emotional conclusion from the facts at hand.
Yep. Well, rather than a spanner into the works, I feel like he wants to throw a wet blanket onto things. Like, don't get too excited. This is a terrible idea.
That is true. He does not like people getting their hopes up.
No, he doesn't.
I wonder if that comes from the whole, they're just interested in facts. So an illogical conclusion is an emotional response.
Yeah.
You're hoping this will work without the necessary scientific facts. I guess because the Vulcans wouldn't have any concept of hope, would they? There are just facts that will lead to something or will not lead to something.
Yeah, there's just probabilities.
Yeah.
Jetrel says his planet exiled him for the same reasons.
Oh.
They called him a Talaxian sympathizer.
Yeah.
He wants to show his work can be used to heal and not just destroy.
Also a tie back to nuclear weapons programs because, like, the guy who developed the Russian hydrogen bomb, Zakharov, was basically shunned in Russia because he spoke out against nuclear weapons. Unwanted education there.
And then Janeway asks if Neelix is really sick with this disease, and Jetrel says no, it was a ruse.
Oh, actually, I thought he said no, he's just annoying.
This is a relief, but also an annoyance, because yet again, we've changed course for no good reason. Neelix asks why he didn't just tell them the truth from the beginning, but Jetrel knew it would be difficult to sell an accomplished scientist like Janeway. He says this will work, and Neelix asks Janeway to at least let him try.
Yes.
So they activate an emergency containment field around the transporter pad, and we do try. We start by beaming something from the cloud onto the transporter, and a figure does start to form. Unfortunately, atomic cohesion can't be maintained, and eventually we stop the test and the figure disappears.
Oh.
It's a lot more dramatic in the scene than I made it sound, but it's very dramatic because it looks like somebody is appearing and then poof, they're gone.
Yeah, they lead you down a path of making you think it's going to work. Yeah. And then right at the end, pull the rug out. Tuvok at that moment could have said, ha ha.
No, he would have said, this is exactly what I said. Then Jetrel collapses and everyone runs to him.
I'm saving my comment here for overanalysis.
Back to sickbay, and Jetrel is near death. Neelix comes to see him, and Jetrel says, I suppose you think this is a fitting punishment for me. But Neelix says, maybe the cascade was a punishment for all of us, for our hatred and our brutality. Yeah. Neelix now says he wants to tell Jetrel that he forgives him. Jetrel seems to kind of smile, but then he dies, and Neelix leaves the room. The end.
Wow. This ending really reminded me of the Stargate SG-1 movie, Arc of Truth. There's a scene with Tilk and Tomin in the mess hall, and Tilk lays out his motivation for the entire series. Freaking awesome piece of acting from Christopher Judge, and probably the best acted scene in the whole series. And it really parallels what Neelix is saying to Jetrel. So I'd advise anybody to watch that. It's actually a really good series and a good movie.
Do you need to watch the series before you watch that movie?
Yes, probably.
Well, so you got some stuff to catch up on.
Yeah, people can binge it. It's worth it.
Well, it was a little bit gritty. I mean, we tried to bring someone back. It didn't work.
Yes.
And then the guy just died. But I guess at least Neelix has sort of freed himself from his own self-hate at this point. Or has he? I'm not sure. But it seems like we're just going to snap our fingers and that's fine.
I kind of think that was the point. The forgiveness part was for him to get past what happened, to stop it impacting his own life.
Oh, no, it definitely was for him. That was why Kes said it.
Yeah.
That he needed to forgive Jetrel so he could forgive himself. Yeah. They literally said it. So, yes, I do believe that was the point.
They kind of spelled it out.
All right. Do you have some overanalysis for us?
Yes, I do. And I think the first thing is when Jetrel asked Janeway to help, I feel if they'd gotten B'Elanna, Carey, Harry, and Janeway in on this, they would have been able to figure something out.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I thought that we gave up pretty easily.
Right.
In fact, I think that's most of what my overanalysis notes are. Like, why didn't we try a little harder? Why didn't we sit down and try to, work together on it? But once the guy died, they were like, well, I guess that didn't work.
Yeah, bummer.
Yeah.
Didn't he share his notes with anyone?
Well, yeah. I was like, did they not try telling Talaxians, here's what we tried, here's the science behind it, here's the data? Or did they just leave?
Bye. I feel this once again is that Federation thing of just ask for the Federation's help. One of my favorite parts of Discovery was when Lorca, who'd hatched this devious, complicated plan to get back to the Mirror Universe. Yeah. And when he's finally discovered, Michael just says, you could have asked. We would have helped you.
Yeah, that's one of my absolute favorite moments on that show.
It's like, if you'd asked Janeway, they would have helped you.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads on to, as you said, what about Talaxia? Are all the Talaxians gone? Were the Harkonnens ethnically cleansing the planet?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any Talaxians left? And if there are Talaxians left, couldn't the Doctor get the full details of Talaxian physiology from the homeworld?
Well, and did nobody notice that Voyager was there?
Yeah. Cool. Wouldn't the Harkonnens notice that? I'll probably get letters about keep on calling them Harkonnens.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a little hand-wavy there because this isn't unique to Voyager. This is a very Star Trek thing. Like, we were trying to do one exact particular thing, and we just ignore everything else around it so that we can do that one thing with Neelix.
Don't bring everybody else in.
Yeah.
Next thing, technology in the Delta Quadrant. Is the Delta Quadrant the backwards quadrant, full of armed space hillbillies? No replicators, no transporters. A lot of the Voyager tech seems to be like, gee whiz, that's amazing technology. But they do seem to be able to develop superweapons. We've had polaric energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just 2 polaric devices could destroy an entire world. We've had the Tetryon Cascade. So it seems like there's this weird technology mismatch. We're getting these super weapons, and they don't have replicators or transporters.
Well, if we look at the fact that we've had now 2 episodes about the dangers of nuclear power, maybe they're trying to tell us something, which is that that this sort of barbarian way of focusing on weapons does not get you where you would want to be taking your race.
That's a good point. That does seem to be an on-brand Star Trek message.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe weapons of mass destruction are a bad idea?
Yeah, but I agree. It is weird. We don't, at least not so far, we haven't run into anybody that has advanced technology.
Right.
I think we do, though.
Apart from the hedonism world.
The liars.
Yeah, they had the long-range transport, but they're all jerks.
Yeah, that was a different problem.
Next thing, I have a quick note about couldn't the doctor cross-check Jetrel's findings?
Yeah.
Do you think Jetrel faked the results so it would appear Neelix had the condition?
Probably.
That's what I assume.
Yeah. Like, look, it's 32, 47, 68. That's bad.
The doctor just has to kind of go, fine. Yeah.
That does seem bad.
It's only Neelix.
It's only Neelix. Oh, man.
Oh. Okay, next thing.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure on the door of Neelix's mess, it actually has an F letter rating for its hygiene and cleanliness.
It should. Yeah, the finger licking was too much for me. Like, don't do that. That is gross. Especially when we go all the way back to when we met Neelix and he was less than hygienic.
Yeah, and still is. Oh, I wonder how many cases of food poisoning the doctor has to deal with. And I really hope the doctor downloads as much medical info he can get from Talaxia.
Yeah, good point. He should be able to do that now. And also, he's got that guy's machine. He can download anything from his machine and from his ship as well.
Oh, that's a good point. This guy died on the ship. So now you've got all his technology. You've got his ship. This is a win for Voyager. They could probably trade that with someone. It sounds like the Harkonnens didn't want him back.
No, or his wife.
Yeah. Well, there's a will involved now, so family will probably be interested. And my final point, which I think is the point of the episode, it's basically about the moral ambiguity of using weapons of mass destruction to end a war. We don't get enough information about what was going on. We don't know if the Talaxians were the aggressor or the victim. And there's kind of the hint of it that if you didn't do military service, the Talaxians would kill you. So it gave more of a push towards the Talaxians were maybe an aggressive expansionist colonial race at that point.
Right.
And the Harkonnens were simply defending themselves. Also, it doesn't deal with, were they already beaten? Was this actually unnecessary? I mean, there's a hint of that saying that they were preparing the homeworld for an invasion. So if you're at that point, I don't think things are going terribly well.
No.
So I think there's very much a parallel with the use of nuclear weapons in World War II. And I think that's the story that they're really trying to tell here. But they're not giving us all the details to make a yes-no judgment.
Again, it's a very Star Trek thing. We're talking about something really big, but we're doing it in the context of a tiny story. Right. The real focus here was about Neelix.
Yeah.
And this one person. But they're telling a much bigger story. You can interpret it as being against weapons of mass destruction, for sure. Or you can also interpret it, if you pull the science part of it out of the guy saying this was an inevitability. If it hadn't been me, it would have been somebody else. So it's just a very Star Trek way of telling a big thing, of making a big point.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
You're talking about a much bigger subject, but you're boiling it down to 2 characters.
Because you have to. You're doing it in 46 minutes, and you're doing it in you're trying to include the characters that people already know. You've established them. And so now you're going to do this. You're going to take a big swing at something.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what they were doing.
I think it worked, yeah.
I'm not sure it was a home run, but I do think that's what was going on, yeah.
And that, I think, wraps up my own overanalysis.
I need somebody to explain to me how this is not a gross violation of the Prime Directive.
Janeway likes Neelix. It's fine.
Imagine if they had managed to make this work, where they had brought some person back to life from the cloud, and they're doing it with the technology that they have, Voyager has, not what the Harkonnens have, not what the Talaxians have.
Oh.
Have we not essentially done the exact thing that we're not supposed to do? We could be changing the balance of power again, right? That's the thing we always talk about. How did it not even come up?
Okay.
This is why the Prime Directive is a problem. We shouldn't have it. It doesn't work.
Well, could you slide this one under the radar as it's actually a humanitarian mission to save lives?
Yes, but we don't do that. I mean, yes, of course, you could explain it that way, but that's not how they explain it in Star Trek. They don't say, oh, yes, but there are exceptions in cases where it's humanitarian. They don't do that. Unless we really like the people.
I'm having difficulty weaseling my way out of that
It's because we didn't have time to introduce all of the Talaxians or the Hakonians or something, or that wasn't what the story was. But this is why I always get so mad about the Prime Directive, because it's only when it's convenient to the story does it matter.
Do you think Jetrel's idea was quixotic? That was also part of it, that it couldn't work, it wasn't going to work, it was impossible.
Maybe.
So it is the old guy tilting at windmills.
Well, maybe, but he talked about the importance of scientific discovery, and it maybe was just him. This was just his next thing that he was trying.
Yeah.
I mean, was he lying? It wasn't really about easing his own conscience, but it was really like, wow, look at this next cool thing I could do.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting take. Yeah. Maybe that's part of what's missing. He's actually ego-driven, and this is just his latest ego project.
I mean, it could be, but also he could just be trying to clear his name a little bit.
Yeah, he does actually suffer guilt from what he created.
I wonder if he still would suffer that guilt if his wife hadn't dumped him.
Oh, that's dark.
Yeah, there's so much you could do with this character. Well, I also for a while thought, oh, he's really just trying to find a cure so he can cure himself.
Yeah.
But then at the end, it wasn't about the cure. It was about something different.
Yeah.
So
he wanted to bring back the dead.
Yeah. Imagine the legend of Dr. Jetrel if he had brought back all the people he killed.
Or even a significant portion, it would be enough.
Yeah, even one or two of them, even, yeah.
Wow.
Then my last point we already talked about, like, did we at least evaluate whether this was truly crazy or we could do it?
Yeah.
You know, did we stop before we flew away and talk about it and see if there were other options? But it didn't look like it. We just went, no, that didn't work. We gotta move on.
I think on my third watching of this, ReBinging, I think I came to the conclusion that it was quixotic. It was a crazy plan.
That makes sense.
By someone who was desperate, especially as he was now almost at the end of his life.
Yeah, so maybe a little bit mad at the end.
Yeah.
What do you think they do with his body and his ship?
They hold onto the ship because that's good trading stuff, and they've got all his equipment. I mean, it's a win for them. I
mean, you download everything you need, strip it of resources, then you put the guy in it and just push it out.
Oh, send it into a star.
No, you just send it back to the home world.
Oh. Well, it sounds like he was exiled from the home world, or he wasn't popular there, so it sounds like they may not be interested in him.
So I guess finders keepers. So when we talk later about losing shuttles, I mean, you know, more shuttles than we actually had. Look, here's a ship. Here's +1. We just went up in shuttles.
Start pulling the material off it. You might be able to make some more shuttles.
Exactly. All right, those are all of my overanalysis points, and I don't have anything for women in the future. It wasn't really the focus of this episode, so really nothing to say. And then in Janeway's leadership corner, it's pretty quiet there as well, because it just wasn't the focus of this episode. Yeah. So not much to say on either topic.
But it did show the consistency with Janeway that she will go out of her way to help.
Yeah, but maybe she was a little bit too trusting. And we have talked about that before, that maybe she jumps a little bit too quickly, but that is quite consistent for Janeway. So it's nothing different here.
Quite consistent for the Federation.
That she would do that. I would also say that that's something that Sisko would do as well, but maybe not so much Picard.
Yeah.
I don't think he was quite as willing to jump into the abyss that quickly. But I think Sisko and Janeway have shown so far anyway that they both would.
I have a justification for this. Mm-hmm. The two of them are in positions, Sisko and Janeway, where they need to form alliances.
Oh, yes.
They need friends. They need people to be on their side. Mm-hmm. Sisko's a little different because he was in the middle of nowhere trying to build those alliances. Janeway's on her own trying to keep them all alive. To me, it would make a lot more sense that they would be more willing to try these things because they need to complete their job, to do their task.
Yes. No, that's totally true. And there are absolutely examples where Sisko was, like, he was willing to burn down Trill to save Dax, remember? So he would do anything to help her. And this is sort of a similar example, not quite as extreme, but a similar example where Janeway was, like, willing to do anything to help Neelix. Right. not a member of her crew from the beginning, but an important member. At least she thinks so, because he can help her in this quadrant. And then if we look at Picard, I don't remember all of the episodes of TNG. It's too long ago. I mean, it was before Voyager. I remember the ones I remember and the ones that I watched recently. But there were certainly examples of where Picard would burn down everything to save the different characters as well. Like, I can think of all the stuff he did for Worf.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right? But super interesting, because at the end of it, he was just like, we're still not friends. You know what I mean? He still kept an arm's length distance. The person that he was maybe felt the closest to was Data. And then there's so many examples even going into the show Picard, where he would do anything for Data, to save Data, to help Data. So all of the captains have shown it. I think I'm just feeling like maybe Janeway jumps into it quicker.
Yeah.
And Sisko too. The two of them would just jump in quicker and make it happen, even though it is a very Starfleet thing to
try and
really
help them,
As crazy as it is, as crazy as all of us who were raised on Wrath of Khan, the needs of the few,
right,
or the one, are actually very important in Star Trek.
Yes.
All right, let's go to rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
Absolute thumbs up. Great episode. It's a little jarring because Neelix has been such a funny character to throw him in with an episode that's this serious, sort of this early. But other than that, it's a great piece of Star Trek. It's a big story told on a small stage, and it works really well. I really enjoyed it. Thumbs up.
I give it a thumbs up as well. I think somehow Neelix was less annoying than usual.
Yeah.
Maybe because this is finally where we're giving him a little bit of nuance, which is important. Because if you're all just one thing, you get very boring very quickly.
And Ethan Phillips can run with it.
Yeah, I was thinking back to Bashir. I know I've compared Bashir and Neelix before, but I was thinking back to Bashir on Deep Space Nine and that episode Distant Voices, the one that we jokingly always called Ow, My Tennis Balls.
That should have been the name of the episode. Let's just face it. It should be the name of it.
And it was almost like we were trying to do the same thing there. We were trying to give this character a little bit of nuance, but that episode was so terrible. Yeah. It didn't work. Whereas this is a better episode, and it does work. It does give Neelix a little bit more of an edge. Like the part about him being ashamed of his cowardice and whether or not it was really cowardice or that was an important element. But also just you learn his backstory, and it's really quite tragic.
Agreed.
So, I think this helps the character of Neelix a bit, but I imagine he goes right back to being goofy and annoying in the next episode.
And giving people food poisoning. Yeah,
that's never going to stop.
And my closing comment, I think, is it is funny how Oppenheimer is such a big thing and now it's streaming. This is an episode we're watching where it's like, wow, you can really draw the parallels.
Yeah.
I advise anybody to read some books on the actual Manhattan Project. Really fascinating. The characters involved are almost larger than life, but they were real, including General Groves.
Maybe I'll just watch the movie. I'm sure it's the same thing.
Oh, yeah. When has a movie never been 100% historically accurate?
Never.
I'd also advise people to watch Stargate SG-1 as well.
Okay, that wraps up season 1, episode 15. Come back next week for episode 16 and the season finale, I think?
Yes, we are planning on having a guest on that episode.
Oh, yes, we are planning to have our friend Atiba Royster join us. Yes, he joined us several times on Deep Space Nine as well. He was a huge Deep Space Nine fan, so I'm not sure what he's going to have to say about Voyager. We shall see. We'll
probably also include a little bit of his wrap-up of what he thinks of the first season.
Absolutely. Okay, in the meantime, if you'd like to send us your own overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, you can email us at ReBingeIT@gmail.com. You can also hit us up on Threads, Instagram, YouTube, the thing that used to be called Twitter, all of those things. We are at ReBingeIT. You can also connect with us on the Talk Through Media Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Star Trek TTM podcasts.
Thanks for joining us on the ReBinge Star Trek Voyager podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.